Junhee is a heartbroken woman, struggling to move on after losing her boyfriend in a plane crash. However, everything changes when she accidentally travels back in time and changes fate to save her boyfriend. But let's go back to where it all started. On a random day, when Minju tries to do her homework in her shop, a boy named Ingyu sees her, and he's mesmerized by her beauty, so his friend, Sihyun, nudges him inside, hoping to get the boy closer to her. Seeing them, Minju greets them and Sihyun realizes that she's a classmate. Ingyu, on the other hand, struggles in communicating with her, so Sihyun diffuses the awkward air by asking for the song she's currently listening to. He asks her for a copy, but when Minju checks and sees they are out of supplies, she asks for his number for her to call when they restock. Seeing a golden opportunity for his friend, Sihyun asks Ingyu to write his number instead, but Ingyu misses his shot by refusing the offer. Disappointed, Sihyun hands Minju the paper and stares daggers at his pathetic friend before walking out of the CD store. As Ingyu also leaves, he looks at Minju, who nearly fangirls right after he leaves. A couple of years later, a high-class lady named Junhee arrives at her office, where her quirky colleague reads out the horoscope of the day, which predicts that Junhee will encounter someone new. The colleague pesters Junhee for her birthday plans, but she brushes her off and heads straight to the meeting. After a day of hard work, she leaves in the disguise of meeting up with someone, which seems strange to her colleagues who are hot for the gist, but in reality, Junhee attends a church hosting a one-year memorial service for her boyfriend, Yanjun, who died in a plane crash. Unable to take it anymore, Junhee storms out of the church, but Yanjun's mom goes after her and asks her why she didn't bother to greet. Junhee then replies as if still coping with the fact that Yanjun's body was never found, so there's a possibility of him surviving. The old lady takes pity on Junhee, and when she touches Junhee's fingers, she realizes that Junhee doesn't have the engagement ring on. There, Junhee learns that Yanjun had planned to give her an engagement ring a year ago on her birthday. As she drives home, she recalls him handing her a box, which she didn't open due to an argument about her going abroad for a year because of her work. Back then, Yanjun didn't want her to leave because he wasn't sure he could fare well with long distance, and this got her mad. Presently, she checks the box and finds a hidden compartment where he had kept the ring, and it makes her cry. One time in the past, Minju missed the school bus, but Sihyun saw her, so he offered her his helmet before zooming off on his scooter, causing Minju to pair up with Ingyu. Unfortunately, they arrive late and are disciplined by their homeroom teacher. At present, Junhee struggles to move on, as she recalls her everyday life with Yanjun. When she gets to the office, a colleague hands her a bouquet left by someone to wish her a happy birthday, so Junhee tries to find out who her secret admirer is but fails to catch him. Later that evening, she goes to Yanjun's art gallery to pick up Yanjun's artwork, which Changyeon, his friend, had piled up. There, she sees an old frame of a girl whom Yanjun had once told her was his friend. After Junhee leaves, she goes to a cafe and texts Yanjun's phone number, talking about how it's her birthday and wishes she could see him. Suddenly, she gets a group photo of Yanjun, Minju, and Ingyu from an unknown Instagram account. When she views it, she spots Yanjun but cannot recognize the other two, so she later texts the sender for more context, but he ghosts her. The next day at work, she asks her colleague to run a digital trail on the photo, but they hit a wall. In the past, after Minju's encounter with the boys, Sihyun later came back to the shop and asked her for her name. The next day, Junhee searches the net for the store behind Yanjun and Minju in the photo, but learns it had closed down decades ago. Curious, she wonders who Minju is. In the past, Minju met up with the boys and walked to class with them. When she entered the room, everyone stared at her since it seemed odd hanging out with the rascals. Later, during physical education, Sihyun cheers Minju up from the stands, and it has her classmate call her lucky for being noticed by a popular student like Sihyun. Meanwhile, another student asks Sihyun if anything is going on between him and Minju, but Sihyun tells him they are just friends. The douchebag proceeds to insult her, and this pisses Ingyu off to the point that he grabs the bully's shirt. When a teacher spots them, Sihyun diffuses the situation, and after the bully leaves, Sihyun tells Ingyu that he stands no chance against the jerk. Later in class, the bully talks trash about Ingyu, so Sihyun gets in a fight with him, and after winning the brawl, Sihyun threatens the dude not to make fun of his friends again. In the present, Na-eon, one of Junhee's colleagues, shows up to report her Sherlock Holmes level of investigation on the photo, and she finds it odd seeing Junhee fixated on Minju when to her they look exactly alike. Na-eon then informs Junhee about how the owner of the cafe in the photo had opened a new shop named 27, which they should check out. So they go there after work, but unfortunately, it's locked. Days later, they head there again and meet Chiwon, who instinctively calls Junhee Minju when he sees her. They show him the photos, and he reveals and informs them that it was taken in 1998, and the girl in the middle was his niece who passed away that same year. After they leave the cafe, Junhee does the math and concludes that the guy in the photo can't be Yanjun since Yanjun would only be 11 years old back then. Devastated, she hops on a bus where she opens the parcel she had received earlier and sees a music tape, so she listens to it. Coincidentally, it was the same tape Sihyun had requested from Minju. Back then, Minju always went unnoticed, and her younger brother was the prioritized child, so one time during an argument, she stormed out of the house. Coincidentally, Sihyun saw her, and he cheered her up. There, he learned she hadn't celebrated her birthdays before, so on her next birthday, he and Ingyu showed up with cake and a new music tape recorder. Later that night, Sihyun dropped her off at her place, and unable to hold her feelings, she confessed to him, but he shot her down because he only saw her as a friend, and he wasn't ready to betray his friend. Devastated, Minju cried and entered her home, only to find that her home was scattered as if her parents had ditched her, so she called her uncle and started panicking. Frustrated, she left the house, and as she tried to get a taxi, she got into an accident. Meanwhile, Junhee in the present makes a wish to see Yanjun one more time, and when she sleeps off, she awakens in Minju's body in the hospital. Upon seeing Sihyun, she hugs him in tears and calls him Yanjun. Meanwhile, Minju wakes up in a strange tunnel and starts exploring it in an attempt to figure out where she is, but she eventually starts crying. Just then, she hears the voice of Sihyun calling out to her, and when she chases after him, she sees him through her real body's eyes like a large projection screen. When Ingyu arrives, he spots them hugging each other, so Sihyun plays it safe by pushing her away as soon as he enters. Ingyu asks her how she's doing, but she gets confused and asks them why they're calling her Minju. Suddenly, she gets a headache as she's flooded with the memories of Minju, and when she looks up at Ingyu, she recognizes him from the memories. Confused, she asks them for the date, and they tell her it's 1998, not 2023 as she thought, and this makes her realize that she has gone back in time. After narrating the events leading up to Minju's accident, she asks about her mother, but they inform her that her mom left the hospital, and this pisses her off because her old woman left her all alone when she was completely unconscious. When they arrive at Minju's house, Junhee scolds her retard of a brother and then yells at her mom for abandoning her at the hospital just to cook for him. She also learns that the reason the house appeared deserted the previous night was that the boy had stolen and run away from home, so they had looked for him. Her body starts losing its strength, so they take her to the hospital. There, after the boys leave, Minju's parents inform her that she wasn't hurt because of the accident as she had explained, but instead, she was found in a field with blood gushing from her head. Meanwhile, Ingyu informs Sihyun that he was secretly watching when Sihyun broke Minju's heart that night, and he accuses Sihyun of being the cause of her injury. However, Sihyun reveals that Ingyu is only angry because he didn't have the marbles to confess his feelings to Minju, so Ingyu accepts and walks away. The next morning, Junhee reads Minju's diary and learns of how Minju has feelings for Sihyun, but she has a great deal of an inferiority complex. Suddenly, she's interrupted by her mom, who informs her that the police want to speak with her, so she heads downstairs and narrates her ordeal to them. They do not agree with the story and also claim that she was knocked out in the fields, but because she cannot remember, they give her their number to reach out to in case her memory of the incident comes back. That evening, Junhee finds the tape that the boys bought Minju for her birthday, and when she opens it, she recognizes it as the same tape that the mystery man left her in 2023. Just then, she hears some rocks hit her window and sees Sihyun outside holding treats which he'd like to share with her. Moments later, they meet in the park, and as they share a treat together, Sihyun expresses his concern for her, but Junhee nonchalantly says he shouldn't remain friends with her since he rejected her. After observing her, Sihyun asks if she's really Minju, since she's been acting completely different ever since she woke up. She instinctively calls him Yanjun again, so he asks her who Yanjun is. Skeptical, Junhee narrates her ordeal with Yanjun and explains that everything she said so far felt like a long dream she had woken up from at the hospital. After hearing her out, Sihyun thinks she's gone crazy as the effect of liking him so much to the point that her head starts creating scenarios. The next day, Junhee doesn't go to school, and this time around, she puts Minju's entitled brother in check. Meanwhile, in school, Sihyun doesn't concentrate in class, and he keeps thinking of Junhee, and as soon as class is over, he catches up to Ingyu, who feels bad about the other day's accusation. And together they head to Junhee's place, and they try investigating the crime scene on their own. After hanging out with her, Ingyu takes her home and finally man up and confesses to her, but he tells her not to answer immediately. Days pass, and the trio hang out all the time, and their bond gets closer than ever. One time, at the CD store, Minju's uncle took a photo of them, and it's the exact one Junhee had seen in the future. Some days later, the police arrive at the store, and they show Junhee a photo of an earring aid they found at the crime scene, so they ask her if she can identify the owner. At that moment, her missing memory floods in, and she recalls Ingyu saving her from the accident, but then dragging her to the field and striking her head. Immediately after the memory influx stops, Junhee opens her eyes and sees she's back in the bus in 2023. Unknown to her that the mysterious man is stalking her, she heads home, and when she gets to her room, she checks the message she sent to Yanjun and discovers that they've been read, so she calls him, and someone picks up the line. Yanjun, on the other hand, refuses to say anything, and he cuts the line, right after she ends the call. Just then, Minju's uncle, Chiwon, walks in to check on him, and Yanjun tells him about how he sat behind Junhee during her bus ride and watched her during the journey. He then informs Chiwon that he picked up the phone when she called, but stopped himself from saying anything so that their plan wouldn't be ruined. While conversing, Junhee calls again, but Yanjun, even though he's emotional, doesn't pick up the call, and he says he can't have any distractions. The following day at work, Junhee tells Na-eon about the calls and guesses that maybe Yeonjun's number now has a new owner. However, she's still confused by the fact that the person ignored her on the phone and read her messages, so Naeon suggests getting help from the office nerd in tracking the phone. When they meet him, he starts to yap about how it's illegal, but the ladies bribe him by offering him a 5-star trip to Willy Wonka's with his girlfriend, and Bro immediately folds. After hacking the system, they find out that the device they're looking for is located at Cafe 27 and it belongs to Sihyun. Junhee immediately gets curious, so after work, they arrive at the cafe and they ask a worker for Chiwon, but he replies that Chiwon is out of town, so they order coffee and decide to wait for him. Time passes and the shop closes for that day, so Junhee heads home without being able to contact Chiwon or know more about Sihyun. Right after she leaves, Yanjun shows up from the inner room, and the worker wonders why Yanjun is hiding from Junhee. Later, Junhee meets with a doctor, and he learns a little about her weird dream regarding Yanjun, but he concludes that it's a result of her longing for Yanjun. Afterwards, she meets up with Chiwon, whom she tells about how she had a dream where she became his niece, Minju, and to her surprise, he doesn't look at her like he's crazy. Then he informs her that Minju once told him that she had a similar experience where she once felt like she was Junhee instead of herself. He then gives her an envelope that contains something he feels she needs to read. A while later, she opens the envelope and finds the diary of Minju, which shocks her. As she starts reading through it, she's stunned by the fact that some pages had her own handwriting, which she had thought she had written in her dream. At that moment, she realizes that she really went back to 1998, so she rushes back to her room, desperate to find a way to go back to meet her man. When she finds the old album, she starts listening to it, and it transports her consciousness back inside Minju's body in 1998. When she realizes she's back in the past, she runs to school, ignoring the cops who show up to interrogate her, and sees Sihyun reading in the library. With tears welling up in her eyes, she approaches him, but he starts yapping about his favorite OnlyFans models, so she walks away angrily. Concerned, he follows her outside, but she brushes him off before going their own way. Little do they know that Ingyu is watching them from the shadows. That evening, Sihyun suggests going to see Minju together, but Ingyu says he'd rather go alone because he wants to get closer to her and informs him that he's told Minju how he feels about her, but he hasn't gotten a reply. Later that evening, Ingyu takes Junhee on a bike ride while Sihyun crashes out at the basketball court because he cannot ignore his selfish friend's demand. During sports at school, Sihyun and Ingyu nearly get into a brawl because they decide to play without passing the ball to each other. After class that day, Sihyun tells Ingyu to stay away from him, and he's going to visit Minju. Some hours later, Sihon takes Junhee, who has been trying to return to the future, to a grass field where he tells her about how they need to set proper boundaries to protect Ingyu's feelings. However, he sees that she's already drifted into La La Land in the middle of his speech, so he watches her intently and notes that a part of him ached when he saw her cry to him at the hospital and also at the school library. There, he vows to make sure she doesn't feel sad, and after watching her for a while, he falls asleep. When she wakes up, she notes that his voice and mannerisms are exactly like Yanjun's, so she touches his cheek, and then he opens his eyes. And in that moment, they stare at each other passionately while lying on the grass. Feeling embarrassed, Sihyeon gets up and asks her why she didn't wake him up when she woke up, and she explains that she didn't want to ruin his sound sleep. With that, they walk back into town together. Several hours later, the police, who had shown up at the school to interrogate Ingyu, took him to their station, where they asked him about the night of Minju's attack. Ingyu replies that he went back home earlier, while Minju rode with Sihon back home. However, one of the cops brings up the fact that they saw footage of Ingyu heading in the direction of Minju's home later that night. Ingyu explains that he wanted to tell her something that night, but refuses to disclose the specifics, claiming that it's private. However, the detective brings out the hearing aid they found at the crime scene and reveals that they'd have to conduct a full investigation on Ingyu since he's now their prime suspect. Meanwhile, Junhee remembers her previous conversation with Chiwon, where he revealed that Minju was murdered on the 13th of October that year. Seeing how Junhee and Minju's fates are intertwined, he believes that Junhee could pull a string in the past that could alter Minju's tragic fate. In the present, Junhee checks on a calendar and finds out that she has 3 months until Minju's death, and she also realizes that she could be the one unalived instead if she sticks around in Minju's body, so she rushes into her brother's room to use his computer, but she nearly loses it due to the slow machine's performance. Eventually, Chiwon shows up, worried about her skipping school, so she privately tries to explain what's wrong by revealing to him that she's Junhee from 2023. However, he calls her a crazy person and tries to take her to Arkham Asylum, but she crashes out and heads back into her room. The next morning, Sihyeon arrives in class and spots the douchebag from earlier trying to bully Ingyu, so he steps in and learns that Ingyu is a suspect for Minju's condition. When the bully starts trolling them, Sihyeon tries to pummel him again. But the teacher stops them and takes Ingyu to the faculty room, where he's told to stay at home for the time being to avoid several problems, including the press. During that time, Sihyeon leaves to get Minju, and he drags her to school. Ingyu, who is unable to take the cold stare he's getting from his classmates, eventually leaves the class but then runs into his friends outside. There, he concludes that Junhee thinks he's guilty and tries to walk away, but she stops him and takes him to the police station, where she explains to the detective that Ingyu isn't the one who attacked her because she was the one who left the hearing aid at the crime scene and not him. She signals to Ingyu to tell the cops that he followed her to get the aid, and when he does, the cops logically put everything together and conclude that he is no longer a suspect. Soon after, the trio feasts together at a diner, and when Junhee sees how Sihyeon eats his noodles, she has flashbacks of Yanjun slurping down ramen in the exact manner. She then makes lame dad jokes, which leaves the boys wondering if she has bad humor, and remembers how Yanjun used to tell her the same joke. That evening, Sihyeon tries to focus on his homework, but he suddenly remembers the joke and starts giggling, believing that it's something that rubs off on him. But then he finds it hard to get Junhee out of his head. This confuses him, but he's even more rattled when he realizes that he can't get Junhee out of his head. Meanwhile, Chiwon takes Junhee out to a street bench, where he agrees to help her find her way back to the future on the condition that she works hard to improve Minju's grades with her adult knowledge. In school, the next day, Junhee starts brainstorming about how to do better in math, which she previously failed, but when some girls invite her to play basketball with their group, she immediately agrees, and it surprises them because she always acted like she wanted to be left alone. During sports, Sihyeon ditches a girl who is clearly into him to cheer for Junhee, who surprises everyone by casually obliterating her opponents like prime LeBron in basketball. After her team wins, she meets up with the boys, who interrogate her about her sudden change in character ever since the accident. To protect her secret, she lies that she's only doing her best impression to make the culprit notice her, and once she reveals to them that she remembered the attacker wearing their school uniform, they get worried upon realizing that the attacker is a student. The next day, as one of the classmates distributes the students' photos during physical education, among them, the mysterious stalker grabs Junhee's picture without anyone noticing. Later that day, after school, Junhee gives a little girl some snacks despite her granny being against it. The next day, Junhee finds out that her math failure dragged her to the bottom of the test rankings while Ingyu and Sehyun are part of the top ranked in class. Following this, she meets with the boys, and they agree to start studying together. In the process of discussing it, she nearly slips up about Sehyun traveling abroad soon. Later, after school, Sehyun saves a girl from being bullied, and they play a game together. It turns out that she's the same girl he helped the other day, and seeing him help her again, she thanks him and introduces herself as Junhee. The name sounds familiar, but Sehyun can't pinpoint where he heard it from. When Junhee gets home, she shows Minju's mom the report card, and the old lady is impressed by her performance, and she hands her money. Meanwhile, the stalker observes Junhee just outside her window later that night. The next day, Junhee chases after the school bus, but she doesn't catch it in time. When Sehyun arrives on his scooter, she begs him to give her a ride, and he agrees. As they ride through the empty road, she holds onto him tightly, and this gets him a bit flustered. After class that day, Sehyun invites Ingyu to come play basketball with him, but Junhee reminds them that Ingyu has to tutor her at the moment. She then offers to treat Ingyu to some McDonald's grub in exchange for the lesson, but Ingyu suggests treating her instead as a way of motivating her to study more. A while later, Ingyu starts lecturing her, but Sehyun gets so jealous that he leaves them to go practice basketball. After he leaves, Ingyu spots a cat outside, and he remembers a time in the past when he was walking with Minju. Back then, when they spotted a cat on the road, she started petting it and told him that she fed that cat every day. However, in the present, when he suggests going to pet the stray cat, Junhee says she is afraid of cats. As they walk home that evening, Junhee notices that Ingyu is acting worried, and when she calls him out for it, he says she's a lot different from the way she used to be. Hearing this, she promises him that the Minju he once knew will soon return, but they have no idea that a mysterious student is staring at them from the hill above. Later that evening, Junhee takes Dohan out to KFC for dinner, and while he eats, she asks him why he ran away from home the other day. He explains that he ran away from home because he heard their parents arguing over who would have custody of him and wanted them to stop fighting. He adds that he didn't like how their parents treated them differently, and this makes Junhee happy. The next day, a student hands Sehyun a note from a pretty girl in class, inviting him to meet her in the school courtyard. He invites Ingyu to follow him, but Bro declines, so he heads out by himself and starts fantasizing about another love confession from Minju. Meanwhile, Ingyu watches from the bushes, and Junhee shows up, so he tells her about Sehyun's rendezvous with a secret admirer, which motivates her to join him in eavesdropping. Suddenly, the hottest girl in the class shows up and confesses her feelings to Sehyun, but the dimwit rejects her by telling her she isn't his one true love. Hearing this, Junhee gets anxious, and she gets a cold glare from the pretty girl before walking away. The next day in class, Junhee finds some photos of her in her desk, and when she shows them to the boys, Sehyun advises her to be careful since the culprit is someone who's watching her every move. She then suggests they start asking people around if they've seen a mysterious photographer around, but Ingyu reminds her that they have an art contest the next day. The next day, the students are taken into the woods to draw nature. There, Sehyun sees Junhee and Ingyu hanging out, so he gets jealous and gives them some space before dozing off. Later that day, Junhee goes to meet him to talk. She helps him dust the grass off his hair, and while at it, they share a romantic moment. Suddenly, rain starts pouring, so they all rush into the school bus, and as they run, Sehyun pictures Junhee running. As the bus drives back to school, Ingyu recalls seeing Junhee and Sehyun locking eyes earlier, and it makes him feel uneasy. Later that day, after dropping Junhee at the store, Sehyun reveals that he has started developing feelings for Junhee. When Ingyu asks him if he'll date her, Sehyun declines, and this makes Ingyu wonder if Sehyun is pitying him, but unable to wiggle his way out of this one, Sehyun reveals that he's relocating to America for good after winter break. When Sehyun gets home, he recalls the mental photo he took of Junhee while she ran in the rain, so he sketches it. The next day in school, as the students prepare for physical education, the popular class girl who got rejected takes a photo of Junhee while she changes, and everyone who sees her silently judges her. After school, during the tutorial, Ingyu asks Junhee if she still likes Sehyun, but she tells him that they are good friends. Unconvinced, Ingyu asks her if her stand will change if Sihon likes her back, but in that moment, Sihon enters the study room and challenges Ingyu for breaking the bro code. They get into an argument, and through the process, Ingyu realizes that he was the only one left in the dark regarding Sihon leaving the country soon, so he gets pissed and says he'll stay away from them in the meantime. Later that evening, Junhee runs into Sihyeon, who is lost in thought, and he apologizes for causing her trouble. Unable to bear the heavy weight on his mind, he confesses his feelings to her, without a care for how the future will play out. The next day after school, Junhee and Ingyu go around town asking people if they saw someone suspicious taking photos, but their efforts are futile. As they walk back home, Junhee tries to defend Sihon's actions for keeping his relocation a secret, but Ingyu stops her and then tells her to act like her old self because he prefers that over her new self. When he tries to walk away, she stops him and then calls Sihyeon over for a serious discussion. There, she confesses that she's Junhee and not Minju, as they know her. After revealing everything about herself, by showing them how her handwriting is different from Minju's, and revealing that Minju is predestined to die on the 13th of October, which is why they should stop the stalker, the boys don't believe her. Instead, they conclude she's trying to bring them together. Soon after, the boys eat together at a diner where Ingyu tells Sihon that he's not really in love with this version of Minju, and they spend the next several hours bonding. That night, the rejected girl, Dahyun, and her lackeys place the zesty photos she took of Junhee on the class board, hoping to get back at Minju for snatching her crush's heart. Unfortunately for Dahyun, she gets abducted by the mysterious student, and the following day, she's found brutally murdered in her class. Amidst the crowd and panic, Junhee sees Dahyun's friends running away as soon as they spot her, so she follows them and hears them scared and worried, believing she was the culprit because her photos were no longer on the board. Curious, Junhee asks them what they are talking about, and they realize she doesn't know anything. Soon after, she meets up with the boys and informs them that it was Dahyun who sent the photos of her, not the attacker. She also brings up how the attacker stopped Dahyun from exposing her pictures by unaliving her, and deduces that it's the same person who attacked Minju. Ingyu eventually leaves them alone after privately theorizing what the culprit would do if he were the one. Left alone, Sihon tells Junhee that he believes her time-traveling story because it's too coherent to be a lie. As he leaves to get her some juice, Sihyeon goes through his sketchpad, and she sees the drawing Yanjun had framed in the future, which was enough evidence for her to realize that Sihyeon was always her Yanjun. Just then, Junhee wakes up in the future where her bestie, Na-eon, snaps her back, and looks worried because Junhee had ignored her calls. Realizing she's back in the future, Junhee rushes to Chiwon and tells him that she's figured out that Sihon has been living in the body of Yanjun the same way she lived in Minju's body in the past. Before he can respond, Yanjun enters the room, so she asks if he's Yanjun or Sihyeon. Sometime later, in the year 2002, Sihyeon returns to Korea after spending time in the United States, and he tries to visit Ingyu in prison, but Ingyu refuses to see him. Later that night, on a bus, Sihyeon falls asleep while listening to the same cassette, but unfortunately for him, the bus gets demolished in a brutal accident, which leaves him in critical condition. After being rushed to the hospital, where he nearly gives up the ghost, the next time he regains his consciousness is in the year 2007 and in the body of Yanjun. He then remembers the stories Junhee used to tell him of her boyfriend, also how he saw Ingyu holding her corpse and claiming that her death was his doing. At one point, he sees Chiwon, who recognizes him, and he briefs the old man on his ordeal. There, Chiwon realizes that Junhee was saying the truth all along, and rather than beating himself about it, he accepts fate. With the little information Sihon can gather about Junhee from the net, he searches for her in a university, and after days of hard work, he surprisingly sees her in the same ramen shop. Back then, before the accident, Yanjun used to hang out with Taeha, and they studied in a cram school for CSAT exams. One time, Yanjun tried confessing to Taeha, but didn't dare to do so. Fortunately, they got another alone time together, where Taeha picked him up in his mom's car, and they went on a road trip. Inside the car, they held hands and finally realized that the feelings they had for each other were mutual. Unfortunately for them, they have a ghastly accident. Fast forward to the ramen shop, where Sihyeon is fixated on Junhee. Once she leaves to meet up with her friend, he silently goes after her but stops and heads home. There, he paints the same sketch of what he drew years ago, and makes up his mind to get into the same university as Junhee, so he moves to Seoul, where his cram school is located, and he later goes to meet Chaewon, who just opened a restaurant in the city. He informs Chaewon of his plan to meet with the current Junhee by enrolling in the same school and trying his best to see if they can fix the past. As Sehun leaves the cafe, Chaewon hands him a box that contains Junhee's belongings. When Sehun gets home and he opens the box, he sees their photos and he gets emotional. After that, he concentrates and gets enrolled in the university as an art major. On his first day at the academy, he spots Junhee, so he follows her to her booth, where she welcomes him with a brochure, hoping he joins her club. Completely love-struck, Sehun confesses to her, and she thinks he's crazy since it's her first time seeing him. She turns him down and reveals she has a boyfriend. Later that day, Sehun runs into Changyun, who invites him to a mixer, so he reluctantly goes. Sehun's luck runs out when he sees that Junhee is a waitress at the restaurant. After the date flopped, Sehun learns the hard truth that Junhee truly has a boyfriend. Not knowing what to do, he sulks at Chaewon's place, but then, he remembers Junhee telling him in the past about how Yanjun was always with her till she started relying on him, so from that day onwards. Sehun shows up a lot in her life, and they even work part-time in the same restaurant. At first, she believes he'll quit due to how hectic the job is, but she finds him holding on and begins to cheer for him silently. Meanwhile, in 2006, Sehun goes to pick Ingyu from prison and takes him home to meet his granny. There, he explains how he got into an accident on a bus, and ever since, he has had a job and taken care of Ingyu's grandma while waiting for his release. Annoyed, Ingyu asks Sehun why he isn't mad at him. After all, he clipped Minju. Despite seeing her dead body on his arm and hearing his statement back then, Sehun still chooses to believe otherwise, and this makes Ingyu leave out of anger. Later, Sehun returns to his room, where the entire wall is filled with markings of him trying to track the culprit. Presently, in 08, Sehun joins Junhee and Dohyun's club, and Junhee doesn't mind even though she knows she's the reason he joined. One time, while cleaning, Sehun advises one of the co-workers to hang out with her friend, who needs her because she just got her heart broken. Junhee listens in on him and can tell that he lost someone close to him. Right after his pep talk, Sehun cries in the bathroom as he recalls Chaewon telling him that Ingyu had claimed his life soon after his release. While trying to cheer him up, Junhee opens up about her past, before telling him that he can rely on her and he should not blame himself for what happened to his friend. Days later, on Junhee's birthday, her boss calls her to work the night shift, but Sehun offers to cover up for her. To his surprise, she shows up and informs him that her boyfriend was busy. After closing hours, Sehun tells her to wait behind, and he rushes to get her a birthday cake, but when he returns, he learns that she had gone to meet her boyfriend. When Junhee sees Dohyun, she learns that he has gotten back with his ex, so she slaps him and leaves the place heartbroken. Suddenly, Sehun calls her and wishes her a happy birthday. She goes to him and realizes that he got her a cake, so she joins him, and he asks her to make a wish. Shortly after they dig into the cake, Sehun learns that the reason Junhee dated Dohyun was that Dohyun reminded her of his old self. After hanging out with him, she thanks him and prepares to leave, but Sehun hands her a gift before she leaves. Days later, Junhee notices a lot of girls staring at Sehun, and her friend reveals how Sehun turned down girls' confessions, saying that they weren't destined together. This makes her realize that he isn't some hotshot who's trying to flirt with her, but someone who genuinely likes her. As time passes, Sehun bonds with her, and at one point, she tells him to drop the formality between them. After all, they are age mates. One time, she falls ill, so Sehun rushes her to the hospital, and he stays with her until she gets better. When he walks her home, she appreciates the gesture and tells him that they've started dating. Meanwhile, one time in 2006, Ingyu's grandma was hospitalized due to a fatal illness, and she eventually passed away. After her cremation, Ingyu gets Sehun drunk and informs him that he'll be moving to the city. Meanwhile, when Sehun wakes up, he has a hunch about where Ingyu is, so he heads to where Minju was murdered and he sees Ingyu jump to his death. Pained and left all alone, Sehun cries for being powerless to stop all the tragic events that have happened to him so far. Back in 08, while Junhee recuperates, Sehun hands her his jacket when she sneezes, and they share a kiss. In the present day, 2023, at the cafe, Junhee can't believe her eyes as she asks Sehun who he is. The couple hug, and when they get back home, Sihan explains how he had known beforehand that the plane was going to crash because his other version from 02 showed up and warned him about it. He explained that if he died, then he'd lose Yanjun's body, and he'd end up back in his original body in 02. But because the other Sihan needed Junhee to go back to the past and look for him, he had to do it. At first, it felt predetermined since he couldn't stop his other self from going to his doom, but to his surprise, in one of the loops, the other Sihan offered him the engagement ring and told him to take care of Junhee in his stead. Presently, Sihan takes out the ring and puts it on Junhee's finger. Realizing that they have the power to change fate, the couple shares a kiss. Right after, they discuss ways to fix the whole mess, believing that Ingyu didn't kill Minju, so Junhee offers to time travel and fix everything. Unfortunately for her, it doesn't work. So they meet Chiwon, and after briefing him, he tells them there's a loophole, and for them to fix that, the couple decides to search for clues regarding Minju's death. Sihyun visits his old school and speaks to his homeroom teacher, who also doesn't believe that Ingyu was the murderer. With the teacher's help, they search the articles in the library and come across Junhee, a fellow student who was taken to the psychiatrist right after Minju's murder. Meanwhile, Changyeon drops by Junhee's house and gives her the chair Sihan had made in the studio. There, he sees her researching Minju's murder case, and she opens up to him about her time-traveling escapade with the help of the cassette recorder. While she brews him coffee, he tries the cassette player and immediately falls asleep. At the same time, the name Changwei rings a bell to Sihyun, and when he searches for Changwei's relative, he realizes that Changyeon is his younger brother, so everything adds up. Junhee, on the other hand, wakes Changyeon up and offers him coffee. He then tells her that he had tried the cassette player out to test her claim, but he ended up falling asleep. When in actuality, he time-traveled to his brother's body and saved Minju from being run over by a car. Then he lured her into a remote place and attempted to eliminate her, but after hitting her once on the head, Junhee woke him up. Being a cunning fella, he orders her to make some food, and when Sihan tries to contact her, he turns off her phone. Then he walks up to her and reveals what he knows about Minju. He immediately grabs her and strangles her till she passes out, but when he tries to take her life, Sihyun unlocks the door, so Changyeon quickly hides. Surprised to see Junhee passed out on the floor, Sihyun hurries over and calls for an emergency. Changyeon then shows up and tries acting surprised, but Junhee doesn't buy it. Instead, he attacks Changyeon after learning he was the one behind the murders. They get into a brawl, and Changyeon stabs him before leaving with the cassette recorder. While bleeding out, Sihan tries to touch Junhee one last time, but he loses consciousness and passes away. Days later, Junhee cries at the morgue after seeing her dead fiancé. There, she promises Chiwon she'll go back in time and fix everything. Unfortunately for her, Changyeon had taken her cassette recorder and diary. Meanwhile, in his hideout, Changyeon uses the recorder, and he goes back in time, possessing Changhui's body once again. He reveals himself to his little self and later on takes the boy to the classroom where he had captured Dahyun, and in that instant, he teaches the boy how to unalive people. In the present moment, Junhee visits the psychiatric hospital and speaks to Changhui, who reveals that he was simply an audience member and couldn't do anything about the death. After the visitation, Junhee realizes that it was because of her that Changyeon had the chance to go back and clip Dahyun and Minju. Later on, she gets invited by the police, who inform her that Changyeon has been captured, but he had damaged the cassette recorder. Devastated, Junhee wonders how she'll go back and fix things. Suddenly, she spots Changyeon being taken away, so she attacks him, but he shocks her by blaming her for Minju's death. Junhee then takes the broken tapes to get them fixed, but almost everyone rejects them. The last one does his best, and when she tries it at home, the tape doesn't work. At that point, she cries out of desperation because she wishes to go back in time and fix everything. Suddenly, she clicks on it one last time, and it starts playing music, so she closes her eyes, and the next time she opens it, she's back in Sihyun's room in 1998. Immediately, she sees him, she cries and hugs him. Sihyun, who is caught off guard, holds still and later takes her home. Meanwhile, Junhee is stuck in the tunnel while Minju finally has full control of her body. She tries to act like Junhee so the others do not suspect her, but when the investigator calls her to interrogate her regarding Do-hyun's death, Minju trembles and the man finds her behavior odd, so he privately tells her to reach out to him if something is wrong. When she hears the bathroom, Junhee, who is stuck in her head, tries telling her to warn the officers regarding Changyeon and also tell her friends. But Minju is hellbent on acting like her and getting to be with Sihyun. Returning to the class, she meets her friends and informs them about the officer, suggesting that she needs a guard, so Sihyun volunteers and he walks her back home later that night from her uncle's store. He then hands her a pager, telling her to reach out to him just in case, and she pecks him on the cheek. When she gets home, she writes something different in the diary that wasn't there in the future, and when Junhee confronts her about it, Minju writes that Sihyun is Yanjun. That's when Junhee realizes that Minju was speaking to her back then. The girl refuses to warn her friends about Changyeon, believing that everything will be fine. Days later, she shows up with a camera and the trio makes memories while visiting an amusement park. When the photos are ready, Sihyun notices her using a different handwriting while filling out the receipt for her photos. Also, when they hear Back in the Rain, he realizes that she isn't acting like her usual self, so he starts avoiding her. One time, it becomes so obvious that Ingyu confronts him, and he tells Ingyu about his findings so far about how Minju has returned to her usual self before the accident. Ingyu finds it hilarious that Sihyun actually believes the whole time travel story Minju had told them, and Sihyun is hurt. Unknown to them, Minju listens in on their conversation, and she learns that Sihyun plans to confront her about it. As she timidly walks away, Changyeon spots her and concludes that she has returned. So later that night, Changyeon goes to her store to buy the same cassette, and he confronts her, telling her that he's aware she's back. After seeing how frightened she was, he tells her he'll come for her. Minutes later, after Changyeon leaves, Minju closes the store, and as she heads home, she realizes that she's being tailed, so she runs but then bumps into Sihyun. He then walks her home, reminding her that he promised to always pick her up. On the way, they go to the park, and he asks her if she remembers what they first talked about there. Minju replies that it was when she stormed out of the house, and he revealed he was going abroad. But then he corrects her and says she's not Junhee, because the first thing Junhee did was tell him about the long dream she had. Sihyun then tells her that she isn't Junhee, and he takes out their group photo and shows her how the handwriting on it is different from what she filled in the receipt. At this point, Junhee yells at Minju to tell him the truth since he's on to them. She pleads with Minju to also open up about Changyeon, who is in Changwee's body, and how he's the one after her, but Minju shushes her up. She then lies to Sihyun that there was no Junhee, but she was just a fantasy he made up to get him to like her. Heartbroken, Sihyun asks her one more time if Junhee is real, and if he'll ever get to see her again, but Minju lies to him before walking off. The next day, which is the 13th of October, Minju reverts to her old self, and the people around her notice, so they tell her about it. When she sees Sihyun, she tries acting like Junhee, but he tells her not to talk to her while trying to act like Junhee. Depressed, she goes to the rooftop and speaks to Junhee about how she wants to end it all. This is because people around her don't like her, but they like Junhee, so Minju believes she's empty, and the best way for her to die isn't by letting Changyeon do the deed, but by claiming her life with her own hands. At first, she tries to jump off the rooftop, but then changes her mind and walks away. During that time, Ingyu reads her lips and realizes that she truly was Junhee for a moment. Once he learns that she wants to end her life, he runs after her but doesn't see her on the rooftop. Minju, on the other hand, was no longer afraid of Changyeon, and she followed him to the site where he had initially tried to clip her. Meanwhile, her friends look around for her, and they eventually head to the site. There, Changyeon leads Minju upstairs and tries to inject her with a syringe, but then the police in the future wake him up, and Changwee is left. Surprised, Changwee runs off, claiming that he isn't the one after her. Disappointed, Minju picks up a glass shard and walks towards the edge of the building to jump off, but Ingyu arrives just in time. He then tries convincing her not to take her life, even confessing to her that he loves her, but then, she doesn't believe him and thinks that he just pitied her because their conditions were similar. Junhee, who realizes that the whole situation was her fault for living in Minju and trying to be better for her, begs Minju not to take her life, and even vows not to interfere. But then Minju threatens to cut herself with the shard and orders Ingyu to stay away. She then walks to the edge of the building and takes a leap of faith. Scared after witnessing his loved one nosedive, Ingyu runs downstairs and picks her up, but by then it's already too late, so he cries into the night. Shortly afterwards, Sihyun arrives, and he sees Ingyu holding Minju's corpse. Horrified, he asks for context, but Ingyu claims he took her life. Confused, Sihon asks why, but Ingyu refuses to talk. Within minutes, the cops arrive, and they take Ingyu to the station. Moments later, Junhee wakes up, and she cries because her effort had failed. She also checks the tape and sees it has broken, so she first reports the incident to Siwon and blames herself for his niece's death, then she tries to have the cassette fixed, but then it doesn't work. One time, she drives to the seashore and tries the spoiled player, but it doesn't turn on, so she recalls Sihyun telling her his heart will always be with her wherever she goes. With that, she closes her eyes, and as the song starts playing, she goes back to the moments before she fell from the building. This time around, Ingyu saves her, and she thanks him, before revealing that she's Junhee and Minju is alright. Sihon arrives later, and he immediately knows that she's Junhee. Later, she tells them the whole story about how she had been time traveling and how it was in the bid to meet Yanjun, who was Sihon. Now that Minju is safe, they worry about her future and Sihon's, but then they believe it'll be alright. Later, Junhee hands Ingyu the tape and tells him to burn it, but he should keep it a secret from Sihon. Junhee then advises Minju not to give up, and she won't interfere in her life anymore. The next day, which is the last day, Junhee hangs out with Sihyun, and he admits that it pains him to see her go, so he kisses her and vows to find her. Right after Ingyu burns the tapes, the timeline resets, and everything goes smoothly. This time around, Ingyu stays with Minju, and Sihon doesn't come between them. 13 years later, Sihon, who heads the webtoon club in the university, comes across Junhee on a bus. At first, he calls her Minju, and once he sees he's mistaken, he withdraws. But then he highlights the bus right after her and heads straight to meet her. Hence, fulfilling his vow to find Junhee no matter what. Thanks for sticking to the end of this video. If you enjoyed the recap, comment part time if you'd like to see part 2. Subscribe to the channel to stay up to date, and thank you for tuning in. We'll catch you in the next one.